Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, welcome to the Climate and Coordination phone call. And we are really excited about this one because I have some cool things to share. First thing that I just found out, which is very alarming, but also quite interesting for the times that we live in, putting a link in the chat right now. There's been a report on January 7th, and it's been shared by some other news outlets that I found. Apparently there's a FEMA report that the United States government puts out, every year. And the 2019 FEMA threat report does not even mention climate change or sea level rise, which is incredible. So I just wanted to start off this week highlighting what exactly we are up against here, that obviously over the next few years, because it's the 2018 to 2022 strategic plan, is apparently what this report is, and there's no mention of climate change, which of course is one of the major issues. People need to be rescued. People need to be prepared for what is to come in their localities, but unfortunately there's no mention of climate change in this report. So I just wanted to attach this article because I just found it really disturbing that the United States government right now, unfortunately, is not willing to even mention it. So that was something. I don't know if anybody has any comments on that, but I have more, and it's good. There's another.
I guess the one question is, historically, has FEMA mentioned climate change as a part of their risk assessment?
I believe that the article that I just read said that the other versions under administrations had mentioned that, because it's such a huge piece of understanding their budget, not just the Pentagon, but rescuing people, providing funds for disaster relief, all that stuff often has to do with climate change. So
yeah, according to the article, under the Obama administration's, climate change was most definitely included in this report. So this is something that has been taken out.
Yeah. So it's very alarming, and I just think it's really important that people are prepared, because a lot of people are still woefully underinformed about these things. And good morning, Fiber.
She's upset about the FEMA report.
Of course she is. Anyway, but I just think it's sad, because a lot of people really just don't know that, they live in a place where sea level could affect them, in the next few years, or where, they could suffer from a fire. People need to know this stuff. And I think this report, since it's the disaster preparedness report or whatever exactly the name was, I just think it should include all possible threats, but it doesn't. So anyway, I do have something else to share, which is really interesting. This article is about an IBM powered blockchain project, which is verifying basically the entire life cycle of food. But this project, it looks like, either initially or just maybe that's the entire idea, is focusing on coffee. And it's a really interesting idea. There's also a video that I can show you.
It's
It's
funny.
called
This was exactly what we were pursuing with Rudy and with Steve Bizzaio. In
Oh,
fact,
okay.
Steve Bizzaio was actually in Uganda and other coffee growing regions to speak with the farmers about exactly this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it's a really good idea because there are other people working on it, and there could be different. I mean, I think the main I think the main dream of a lot of these people that are working on this is maybe not to have a different app for every different type of food that you buy, but obviously if we could have, one app that can verify, the life cycle of everything, that would be amazing. But anyway, this is called the Thank My Farmer app, and it's really cool. And there's one feature about it. I'll send you the YouTube video because IBM made a little trailer and they uploaded it just on January 6th to YouTube to talk about this. But people can obviously, learn a lot about their coffee, or maybe in the future other types of food. But the cool thing is that you can tip the farmers, so you can actually thank the farmers and the money goes to them. So it's a really fascinating way, just like we used to talk about with music streaming and other services, how people should be able to thank or tip the musicians they work with. This is a really interesting way that people can give thanks to the farmers for making high quality coffee. And this is going to be something I think that is really going to shoot up in interest in the next few years. Every week that I research things to talk about on this phone call, I find all sorts of different projects. There's one for fish. There's there's all sorts of different ones. So it's going to be, I think it's called Fish Coin is one of them. But anyway, there's going to be a lot more of this, I think, coming up.
I agree. I mean, so when I talk about coordination infrastructure, these are exactly the kinds of things that I mean when I say coordination infrastructure. So Archain was obviously investigating this for coffee. Archain was also working with another group that was doing the same thing for energy sources. So there was a group called Expansive that we funded that was providing all of the tracking metadata information for lots of fuel and other energy sources, which makes it it's the kind of information that would have a significant impact on whether or not you purchase a lot of fuel, whether it's oil or natural gas or electricity, right? If you know that the energy is green, it doesn't come from a dirty supply, then you might want to support that. Whereas if it's dirty, you may be less inclined, or this may just impact the price. So clean energy is considered premium, and the dirty stuff is it becomes less and less viable in terms of market price to continue to produce dirty energy. So that's but overall, the use of blockchain to track the provenance of goods and services that are supplied is an important part of the kind of coordination technology that is necessary to begin this sort of transformational shift. And the reason it's more attractive to do it as blockchain is because then it's community-owned data, and not data that's provided by a centralized third party who could, because then you have issues about whether or not you trust this third party. You have issues about where they got their information, and are they being paid to deliver information one way versus another way. All of those kinds of things, those kinds of risks have a very different profile on a blockchain, which is which is a public blockchain, publicly managed, publicly run, right? That's it's a very different source of information, and it has less of a big brother feel, and less of a the community that's doing that can have more faith that they're not being hornswoggled by some third party.
Yeah, well, and I think the demand for this is going to be high in all sorts of different areas. Like a few weeks ago, we were discussing clothing and circular economies, and how, some companies might, say, can you please return your garment when you don't want it anymore so that we can recycle it? Or, also in the cosmetics and health industries and personal care products, all that stuff, there's been a huge debate about that in that world. How do you know that there aren't toxic ingredients in your shampoo? Is it okay to use it on your kids? All that stuff. So I think there's going to be major demand for this kind of infrastructure in the future, and I'm really excited to see what happens with this app, because they've just launched it. It looks like 2-3 days ago. So and the video, if anybody ever has a chance to watch it, the video that is also embedded in that article is on YouTube, and I think it's a really nice video. I think they describe their project really well. They interview a couple of the farmers, the coffee farmers, and they talk about how this project has benefited them, and the pride that comes that they come to work with, because people, through this app and through this blockchain infrastructure, are able to really appreciate the quality of what they're doing. So all of it just seems like a really interesting idea, and we'll have to see what happens with it. So anyway, I wanted to pass the floor over to Daryl, who wants to talk about another fascinating video that I sent him. And so Daryl, if you're prepared, you can take it away.
I don't know about prepared, but I'll give it a shot.
Well, no one's ever really prepared. I mean, come on.
I did write some stuff down, so but I'd actually like to jump off from that article that you posted, because there was another link in that article.
Oh yeah, great.
And it kind of talks a bit about what you guys are just talking about here. And in that link, it's in the computerworld.com. And the headline is Top 3 Enterprise Tech Trends to Watch in 2020. And one of the things it talks about is blockchain. And it says, if blockchain felt more like hype than reality in 2019, prepare for that to change. Industry watchers expect 2020 to be the year the distributed ledger technology matures and we see use cases that go beyond cryptocurrency. Areas where experts envision growth include data security, the supply chain, and electronic health records. Of course, this statement is exciting for those of us, and I do agree. I think that when looking at the microcosm of us and our chain, I think in 2020, there's going to be a mainnet that arrives. There's going to be some practical use cases that people are going to start applying to it, and people are going to start to kind of see what we've been building and why. So here's the thing, that statement talks about the what and the how, but it leaves out the important part, and that's the why. So yesterday, Nora, you sent me a YouTube video I loved it. It was great.
I'm so glad you liked it. Yay.
Yeah. And it's a TED Talk of this guy named Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it would be funny if that's how you pronounce it. But he had a really great way of explaining why some companies succeed and some companies fail. And he described it in terms of the golden circle. It's a very simple diagram. There's a big circle, and inside that big circle is a smaller circle, and inside that smaller circle is a smaller circle. And in the outer part of the big circle, there's the what. And inside of that is the how. And inside of that, the smallest circle is the why. And he goes on to explain that most companies focus on the what and the how and leave it up to you to come up with the why. Whereas the consistently successful companies like Apple or Tesla, they start with the why being the center of what they do, and the how and what work out from there. So he kind of repeats this mantra: people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And he says most organizations know what they do, they may know how they do it, but less organizations know why they do it. And then it starts getting more interesting. He explains that the why isn't make a profit. That's a result. The why is, what is your purpose? What is your belief? Why does your organization exist? And then he explains it from the whole biological viewpoint of the human brain. So the newest part of the human brain, the neocortex, it represents the what. It's the rational, analytical thought. It's where language came from. And the how and the why come from the limbic part of the brain that controls your feelings, trust, loyalty, decision-making, but it doesn't control language. So when you look at the biology of the brain, the direction comes from the limbic part of the brain where feelings, trust, and loyalty come from. But it doesn't control the rational, analytical thought. So he says that successful organizations operate more like the brain, where the why, the feelings, the trust, the loyalty come first and guide the how and the what. And then he talks about why companies fail, and people always have the same three reasons. They say it was undercapitalized, the wrong people were in charge, and there were bad market conditions. People never say, we didn't follow our why, and that's why we failed. Yet companies survive unsurmountable obstacles when they're united around a why. So what is the why of our chain? I believe that the answer lies in our name. The R in our chain stands for row calculus, or row lang, the language that Greg devised. But it also stands for our chain. And I think this is connected to what Greg was saying before, where we're interested in building a decentralized blockchain for the people. There's something that's always stuck in my mind, that at the first Mycelia event, Vinay Gupta, he said, who controls the database controls the future. And that statement has always really stuck with me. And I believe that we at our chain, we want the control of the database to be us, ourselves, each other. Not Google or Facebook or Amazon or our governments. And that's the why that gets me up in the morning. It's our chain. And the thing that brought me to our chain was the dream system that I wanted to build. I've dreamt of this music-based social network for literally decades now. It's a system where the database is controlled by ourselves, each other, not some large centralized music label or publisher or distributor or streaming service. So for me, the why of our chain lies in our name. We understand that who controls the database controls the future, and we understand that the control must not come from a centralized place. It must come from each other working together in a more decentralized fashion. So I just thought I'd let it go there and see what people have to say about that thought.
I can't believe you summarized that whole talk so well. I'm so impressed. That was outstanding. Just so everybody knows, I did paste the link to that video, to the TED Talk that was sent to me in the chat. If anybody wants to check it out later, I highly recommend it. So thank you so much, Daryl, for summarizing that. I think it's really highly relevant to what everybody is trying to do here, at our chain, but also with climate and, and beyond, just with humanity,
Well, I think that's really what distinguishes us from other blockchain projects. And it lies in our name.
Thank you for recognizing that. the only other name that I wanted prior to our chain was something to do with Unchained, because for me, it's not a chain in the sense of a burden or a shackle, manacle. It's a chain that has to do with the strength of what we can do together. But it's through what we can do together that we find a kind of liberation. This goes all the way back to observations I made when I was trying to develop more cooperative housing situations in Austin, Texas, for my friends and my family. I noticed that whenever we could cooperate, we could find rental situations that were far better. I was able to get this giant mansion because I could bring together two families and another person to kind of share the place, and we had more than enough room for everyone. And when we couldn't make things work out, then our standard of living rose lowered and failed. And so it was a clear observation to me that the conditions of our life have everything to do with how well we can get along. It's and so therein is this sense of liberation that comes from taking on the responsibilities of working together. So this is a kind of funny irony in the name Our Chain, right? Because it's not our chain in the sense of our shackles. We're not on a chain gang, but rather it's the kind of chain, the human chains that can form to create a really powerful force to get something positive done in the world.
Love it. That's why I'm here. Yeah. So there's something else that Simon Sinek guy had to say. He was talking about the difference between leaders and those who lead. He talks about leaders. Leaders hold a position of power or authority, but those who lead inspire us. Whether individuals or organizations, we follow those who lead, not because we have to, but because we want to. We follow those who lead, not for them, but for ourselves.
Yes, exactly. I love that he talked about Martin Luther King with that example. And he said, I can't remember exactly what year it was, and I'm sorry that I can't remember, but it was in the 60s, right? That he did that really famous speech in Washington, D.C. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, 250,000.
The I Have a Dream speech.
Yeah.
Was it that one?
Yes, it was. Yeah. The I Have a Dream speech,
at the Washington
250,000
Monument,
people.
And it was probably around 60. When he was assassinated in 68? So it's probably in 1965.
Yeah, I guess in the thank you so much, Ned, for that. I think in the YouTube clip they called it something else, but I didn't realize it was the same speech as that one. But anyway, so 250,000 people came to see this. Apparently they didn't send the invitations out, and obviously there was no internet. This is all stuff that Simon mentions in the video, and so he said, why did people come? People came from really far away to watch this. They took buses and all sorts of stuff, and it was hot, apparently really hot that day. And and he was saying, why did people come for Martin Luther King? No, they came for themselves. That's what he says in the video. Because they wanted to be there. The thing that the dream that he talked about was the same thing that they also had a dream for. So there's a connection on this stream. And I love also, Daryl, you probably remember from the video, he says it's the I have a dream speech, not I have a plan speech.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to point out, because he kind of brings it all back to kind of the idea of the golden circle, where you have the what and the how, but the why. If the why guides your organization or your whatever it is you're wanting to do, you're going to have a better chance of having success with your plans. And so he brought it all back. It was the I have the dream speech, not the I have a plan speech. And there's something else that I kind of triggered me with when he talks about the idea of leaders and then those who lead. So leaders lead by power or authority, and it can be very effective. But those who lead inspire us to do something for ourselves. And that rhetoric kind of reminded me of a book that really influenced me quite heavily. I read in the late 80s. Called Finite and Infinite Games by this guy named James P. Carse. And that book kind of explains those two things really well. He starts off the book by saying there are at least two kinds of games. One could be called finite and the other infinite. An infinite game is played for the purpose of winning. Sorry, a finite game is played for the purpose of winning. An infinite game is played for the purpose of continuing the play. So we make decisions multiple times every day that have to do with finite or infinite play. And James P. Carr suggests that if we tend to choose the infinite path, life becomes more meaningful and full of adventure. So I believe, as many of us do, that humanity, being confronted with the greatest challenge we've ever faced, in order to survive, we must shift from a finite mindset to an infinite mindset. We must rapidly evolve, a phase shift towards a collective intelligence that roots around the finite zero-sum thinking of territory towards one of planetary regenerative cooperation. We have no choice any longer. Either we shift to the infinite mindset of planetary regenerative cooperation, or we no longer survive. And for me, this is what our chain represents, this shift, this human shift in human thinking. And so the very architecture of what we're building, like the whole kind of basis, to me, starts with that why, and allows us to build on top of this. Like, Greg often talks about correct by construction. In the technical sense, I think of it often as also in the kind of philosophical or social architectural sense as well. That's why I just love being involved with this project.
Thank you, Daryl. I really appreciate it. Feels like you're on fire today. The one thing I wanted to amplify in that point about those who lead is that once you have that attitude, then leadership can become more fluid, right? So it's not like you have a leadership position for a fixed period of time, or you have a leadership position because your parents were leaders, or anything like that. It's that people recognize in the moment you've got what's necessary to carry the torch for all of us. And then, at another time, you begin to recognize, oh, over there, that's where the point of light is. Here's the torch, right? And it's so liberating, because then you don't have the burden of, or the fear of ill-gotten authority. The authority comes to you naturally, and when you let it flow and pass it on when it's the natural time to pass it on, then you're just free. There's nothing that's shackling you. Again, back to this theme. So this to me feels like a much more rational as well, rationally oriented as well as limbically oriented approach. And if you read the book Stealing Fire, one of the things that really stands out in their analysis is they talk to Navy SEALs, and Navy SEAls have exactly the same attitude about leadership. It's not command and control. It's recognizing who the leader is in the moment and being able to pass on leadership to the person who has the vision or the direction, being able to see, okay, now's the time to pass it on. It's a very different model, but it's the kind of model that happens in really highly effective teams.
That's awesome. Yeah, it to me, like, again, when you're talking, it reminds me of the whole finite and infinite games ideal, where if you're a leader and you want to maintain your leadership status, so you entrench yourself in and you try to kind of, prevent anyone else from taking over, that's very finite, and you're not really helping anybody in the situation, especially yourself. Yet,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting, Greg, that you bring up the military, because people don't realize this, but the U.S. military has been at the forefront of transforming their organizing structures over the last couple of decades.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
so, where other militaries may be command and control, the U.S. military has really made a has made a major concerted effort to modernize their managerial style. Yeah, it's pretty impressive to be able to do it on that larger scale.
I agree 100%, and I also agree with Daryl that the connection to the finite and infinite games is absolutely you're spot on. There's another discipline, the Alexander technique, where they talk about it in terms of end gaming. So if you're seeking an end, this is the zero-sum approach, then you achieve it, right? You get your end and things are done. It's finite. Whereas if you leave room for play, for exploration, less goal-seeking and more attending to the joy of the game itself, then things have a kind of life and a kind of buoyancy. So I really like that. Who did you say it was? Cars?
Yeah, his name's James P. Cars.
Cars. Okay.
Yeah. It's a short little book. It's 150 pages, but it's full of all sorts of brain twists and teasers. He substitutes verbs for nouns a lot, so the sentences can be kind of hard to wrap your head around. But it's a great book. I mean, for me, it really I fell in love with my current partner, of which we've been together for 35 years, through reading that book together.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, I think this group on this particular RCast, I think that we kind of specialize in things that are hard to wrap our heads around. So I think this is perfect. And thank you so much for sharing all that. Ian, we haven't heard from you today. I was just wondering if you have any comments about any of this stuff that we talked about, or if you got a chance to check out that the IBM project that I shared.
I haven't checked that out yet, but I really loved what Daryl was saying. It sounded like he had written out a great why for RChain.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's something that we've been working on, actually. Daryl and I have been really thinking about that. And, I think that we're pretty close already with what is on the RChain homepage, which Daryl has read to me so many times, but somehow I've still not memorized. I'm so sorry. But there's also a great video that's also on the homepage of RChain, which I think really does a great job of very quickly, maybe in like 2 minutes it is or something, really ties together everything that RChain kind of stands for, our goals, our visions, all of that. I think that's a really great video. And, you know, just thinking about what Simon says, I do think that going from a why perspective is so important. Last night after I watched that video, I was thinking about all the great artists and people and, you know, obviously companies too, but going beyond that, I was thinking about all the people that I really look up to around the world, and they do have a very, very strong why. And I think that is something that if RChain can get that really nailed down, I think that things will really transform in a positive way. Not that, you know, great progress isn't already being made every day toward mainnet and everything else, but I think this little piece is something that's very important.
And Daryl, what was the quote? Who owns the database owns the
future.
future. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Vinay Gupta. And he said that at the beginning of the very first Mycelia event. You know, that certainly applies to the music industry, but I think it applies to, you know, everything. And right now, the biggest companies in the world are scrambling to own the database, competing with each other very finitely, I might add, to, you know, to obtain the grand ownership of all of us, of all of our data. And what could go wrong?
What couldn't go wrong?
Exactly.
Sorry,
So, you know, so, you know, to me, you know, it really, you know, I just try to imagine, you know, what RChain and the projects RChain supports, what it's going to look like in like 10, 20 years. And to me, I see something that will directly compete with the model that has made the biggest companies in the world, the whole surveillance capitalist model. And I see it competing just because it will work better. If we have like a system that that involves us collectively owning the data and being in control of our own data, I think it will just simply function better.
Yeah, I mean, that'll definitely be an attractive force. People will definitely show up because they want to for that, you know, not because, you know, they need to make us happy or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say that I feel
sure.
that the having the community own the database is what gets us around this big brotherly approach to the life cycle management stuff. The moment that you have some, you know, company like Google or Facebook owning the database, then the trust issues become insurmountable. But when the community owns the database, then you at least have the possibility of there being a confidence and trust in the data that you're collecting. It's just, I know that this is a perennial dialogue about, you know, privately run things versus publicly run things, but I genuinely believe that for the kind of global coordination that we're talking about, we have to have the kind of responsibility and accountability that comes with I don't want to say the private sector because that's not what I mean, but when someone feels personally in charge of something, or they feel a sense of responsibility to something, then you get higher quality. But we have to be able to stitch that sense of accountability, responsibility, stewardship, all of those things into a larger framework that and the responsibility is to each other. Those are the two things that have to be reconciled. And I feel like when we're talking about these giant life cycle databases for precious resources, we get, it can become very, very dangerous to hide that behind closed doors, the closed doors of some private company. But I'm much more comfortable if I know that data is owned by the community at large and not a private company. But I don't know. I'm curious. How do other people feel?
I totally agree that, to me, I would just obviously tend to trust it more. And I think trust is going to be like a huge, important word in the coming decade.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Daryl. I was just saying I agree.
Yeah, and I guess this is also why just the whole kind of RChain quest is just so fascinating to me, because it's also so deeply intrinsically interwoven into the whole governance of how we structure ourselves, and then that will ripple out. So we're not governmental, we're not corporate, we're something different, we're something new. It's post-capitalist in one way of looking at it, it's some new form of coordinated community-based governance.
I think just the trust level right now of most, major corporations. I mean, some of them are doing an okay job, obviously, but just there's so much bad sentiment towards corporations because, they're not, generally paying taxes. A lot of, these social networks have really compromised our elections, to certain different extents. Obviously, like the fossil fuel companies have such a terrible trust. So glad Fiber agrees with me. That's always good to hear. The fossil fuel companies now are doing a really sneaky thing on social media and with commercials that they themselves are trying to say that they have the solutions. I even saw one that said, burning more fossil fuels is going to help us or something. It was like kind of insane. And there's a lot of different categories of corporations that have a very low, the credit bureaus that keep getting hacked and getting everybody's information on the dark web. That's a great thing. I mean, if you just go down the list, there's very few corporations that really have people's trust. Clothing corporations, violating all sorts of human rights standards and also polluting the environment, which, necessitates a more secular economic approach, which we discussed. And I think possibly in the future, we might do one of these centering around surveillance capitalism, which I think would be really useful. But just because trust of corporations in general, not totally across the board, but in general is so low right now, I definitely think public ownership is going to be a very attractive quality in the future.
Yeah, like when I think of the term public ownership, my first thought doesn't jump straight to government. I can see how that is implied, but my first thought jumps to something else.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I was just watching the film Sicko last night again, which is such a great film by Michael Moore about healthcare in the United States. It came out in like 2007 or 2009 or something, so it's now more than 10 years old. But it's a really amazing look at just people who have health insurance in this country and how they're faring with their health insurance. But he talks about a lot of subjects that are very closely related to a lot of things that we're talking about now, especially with the idea of socialized medicine or public medicine, and how people think it's going to be such a disaster. And he goes to all these different countries and interviews people about it. And anyway, I just wanted to mention it because it's such an interesting film and really highlights a lot of the fears that people have around public ownership of things. So that's just a little something.
Yeah, up here in
Well, I
Canada.
mean, no spoilers. Sorry, Daryl, but no spoilers. But since the film is already 10 years old, the coup de grace when he takes the 9/11 firefighters who were injured in public service and have been unable to get any sort of health care or support, right?
Mm-hmm.
He takes them down to Cuba.
Well, yeah, he takes them to Gitmo. He takes them to Guantanamo Bay because they found out, there was a report that came out that there were, terrorists. Obviously, there are some innocent people there too, unfortunately, but they're treating the terrorists with universal health care. And so that's why he took them down there. Obviously, they didn't let them in. So then he took them to a different part of Cuba, and he took them to this hospital, and it was amazing. I mean, like, some of these people really needed major help, and they were all able to get it. It's the ending, I was crying and crying and crying. It's so emotional just to see people be treated, like human beings. And this fear of publicly owned companies or publicly owned medicine or whatever it is, it's just, you don't realize how much you're missing until you see it for yourself. And I'm wondering if publicly owned blockchains and companies, cooperatives, different things like that might also provide an emotional uplift once we realize how great it is, to not have the other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was mentioning to Daryl yesterday. So it's very similar to how we treated our Vietnam vets who were suffering from Agent Orange poisoning, and the lack of admittance that there was a problem, and two, giving them the kind of timely care. And a good friend of mine, his mother worked on Agent Orange population studies. That was kind of her big thing, a number of years ago. And that would be really interesting to get up on the blockchain, as a public good, to see that data, so people can start, seeing the truth behind some of these calamities that we've caused. But just like the firefighters at 9/11, even our vets who, part of our population wears the pins and claims to support, but then when it comes to funding their health care for injuries they incurred in the service of the country, and then they just kind of abdicate all their moral responsibility to do that.
Yeah, totally.
And like climate change, for many, many, many years, there was denial about the negative effects of Agent Orange.
Yeah. Completely. That's such a good point, that we keep doing this over and over again, and with different things. But one little moment from the film, from Sicko, that I wanted to just point out that was so emotional was when they got out of the hospital, these three, I think one of them might have been an EMT, but maybe they were all firefighters. I don't know. And actually, I think a couple of them were volunteers, which just adds insult to injury. They were actually not even, I don't think, paid for the hours they put in, finding, rescuing people. But anyway, the most emotional moment, I think, for me and probably for them, was that these firefighters, in Cuba, the local firefighters who were not part of 9/11, they all gathered outside of their the fire station and all waited to meet these three people from the United States. And one of them gave the most amazing speech about how firefighters are one big family around the world, and they salute them. And it was so emotional because it's just a completely different way of looking at the world. And I think they were really surprised to see that they would be welcomed so so graciously by them, because here they were just trying to find a doctor. And of course, Cuba had been kind of seen as an enemy of the United States for a while. I mean, I'm not an expert in this because it's a little, I'm not really sure, but it seems like, we weren't really supposed to be friends with the Cuban people. And so it was such an emotional thing. I guess we're getting a little bit off the topic of climate and coordination, but anyway, I really encourage everybody to check out that film if they haven't seen it, even though it's pretty old.
Well, I guess what I would say is that there's this relationship between the internal climate, the interior climate, the emotional climate, and the external climate. And the more we begin to recognize this explicitly, the more we'll be able to, level up in those infinite games. If we want a seat at the table in the infinite games, then level 1 is beginning to see that there's this connection between the inner and the outer, and it's undeniable, and without it, we don't get a seat at the table. It's just we continue to recapitulate the cycles of the finite games. It's like a law. It's unavoidable.